Good afternoon, General. It's fantastic to see you again.
Hey, good morning, Jason.
Sir, a lot of people are saying that right now what's going on inside of Ukraine is that there's a stalemate. Things aren't really moving forward. The Ukrainians aren't advancing, and they've already gotten the attackums. Why is that then they are not moving forward? What's happening?
Well, of course, they are moving forward, just not as fast as we would all like to see. I think the part of the frustration and maybe disappointment that some observers have is that they're looking at the counteroffensive as only what's happening on the ground. You know, the fighting in the trenches, getting through the minefields, how difficult and slow that has been. But that's only a part of the counteroffensive. The Ukrainians are doing what we talk about doing, which is counter to the Ukrainians are doing what we always talk about doing in the U.S. and at NATO, multi-domain operations. That means air, land, sea, cyber, space. They're using all of those, and where you integrate the effects of each of these domains to achieve your objective. Of course, the Ukrainians do a good job of protecting information, so they haven't advertised what their objective for the counteroffensive specific objective is, but I believe it is to liberate Crimea, the decisive terrain of this war. Ukraine knows it'll never be safe or secure as long as Russia occupies Crimea, as long as the Black Sea Fleet or the Russian Air Force can operate from there. And they also know, maybe even more importantly, they'll never be able to fully rebuild their country if Russia continues to occupy Crimea and blocks access into Azov Sea, which means that the two ports of Mariupol and Verdansk will never regain their usefulness or reach their potential. And then, of course, the other three main ports, Odessa, Kherson, and Mykolaiv, will always be under threat of missiles and rockets and attacks from Crimea. So for those reasons, they have to liberate Crimea. And people, even smart, well-intentioned people saying, come on, give up Crimea for the sake of peace, really need to get a map and read a little bit of history and understand that that is a totally infeasible outcome for Ukraine. So the counteroffensive is aimed at the liberation of Crimea. I believe the way you do this is by first isolating the Crimean Peninsula. That means cutting the so-called land bridge that runs along the coast of Azov Sea from Rostov down to through Mariupol, Verdansk, and Melitopol into Crimea. And then, of course, the famous Kerch Bridge, which has already been hit a couple of times. And I believe that the Ukrainians will take care of that bridge when they're ready. So the ground part, the land part of the counteroffensive that we've been watching is aimed towards that isolation, that severance of the land bridge. And by the way, that gives them the ability to bring up more long-range weapons. Why is that important? Because the next part of the liberation of Crimea involves making Crimea untenable, uninhabitable for the Russian Navy, the Russian Air Force, Russian logistics, Russian headquarters. So long-range precision weapons enable them to strike Sevastopol, to strike the airbase at Saki, to strike the logistics hub at Jankoy. This is how they can make Russia have to leave, or at least their military capabilities have to leave, which would be a necessary precursor to eventual liberation and occupation of Crimea. And we're seeing it happen already. A large part of the Black Sea Fleet has relocated further east because of the precision strikes on the maintenance facility at Sevastopol and then the headquarters.
Some people have said that there's not been a decision that we really want Ukraine to win. That is, there's not been a political decision. The objective of the United States is that Ukraine wins and will supply them with the weapons necessary, such as ATACMS. The type that we've given were not necessarily the type necessary to do all that Ukraine needs to do. What do you think about that?
Well, as proud as I am of what the administration has done with strong bipartisan congressional support so far, more than 50 nations supporting Ukraine, significant contributions by the United States to helping Ukraine fight against Russian aggression. The fact is, we've stopped short of the most important task, which is to clearly identify the objective. What is the purpose of doing all this? To say that we're with Ukraine for as long as it takes it is not an end state. That's a feel-good statement that means nothing, actually. And so I think the administration has got to clearly identify what is our purpose, what is the objective. Obviously, I believe that end state should be the defeat of Russia, eject them back to the 1991 borders. That's what the Ukrainians have said their objective is. So sometimes people in the White House will say, well, it's up to the Ukrainians to decide they've said it very clearly numerous times. It's reestablished sovereignty of Ukraine. That means 1991 borders. But because the administration fails to do that, one of the outcomes or a manifestation of that is this incremental decision-making about what to provide. I mean, how long did we wait before they finally decided to provide 31 tanks? Or to finally start training F-16 pilots, or to now finally deliver a version of ATACMS that we saw in action just a few days ago. This is because they are not committed to Ukraine winning. If they were committed to Ukraine winning, we would not hear any excuses about, well, you know, an Abrams tank burns too much fuel, takes too long to train pilots, only 8 of them can speak English. You know, I mean, all these ridiculous excuses. And then on ATACMS, you know, I heard 4 or 5 different excuses, including we don't have enough. But then you hear from the CEO of Lockheed, he's never been approached by DOD, by the Department of Defense. Can you make more? So this is about a lack of political will and indecision. And by the way, you know, we did not have a clear objective in Afghanistan after the first year. We didn't, and so we spent 20 years and $2 trillion and thousands of lives, all to end in a disaster. When you don't have a clear objective, it's very difficult to develop and implement effective policy. So that objective is the key. That's what the White House has got to do this, and they need to be confident, not worried about what might happen when Ukraine wins. Yes, of course, it will be humiliating for Vladimir Putin. Okay, is it in our interest to protect his ego? Is it in our interest to give them an easy off ramp? No. I mean, Russia has been an empire for 500 years, and until they are actually defeated and people are held accountable by The Hague and other for all their war crimes, then we're going to continue to deal with this for decades into the future.
Sir, let me ask you 2 final questions. First, some of the NATO countries, some of our allies in NATO, have become very soft on Ukraine, to say the least. One NATO leader, country's leader, as you know, went to Beijing rather, to meet with Vladimir Putin last week. What do you think about countries like this? Should they still be allowed in the NATO, or is that a threat for European security? Should we be more cautious what information we share with those countries?
Well, I think there will be questions about trust and reliability with some allies, whether we're talking about Hungary or people were frustrated with Turkey. But you know what? When President Trump was in office, people were very, very distrustful of us. I mean, first time in my life that an American president questioned whether or not the United States would live up to an Article 5 commitment. That was very damaging. And now, you know, as you know, I live here in Frankfurt. You spend most of your time in Europe. Our European allies are very worried about a return or another, whether it's Trump again or another American president that is not committed to NATO, that is not committed to Europe. So I don't think that we want to get into the habit of kicking people out of NATO just because the current leader might be someone who is a problem, whether it's Orban from Hungary or the new prime minister in Slovakia, Mr. Fico. What the United States has got to make very clear that we are 100% committed, that there's no distance between us and the goals and the values of the alliance. And I think that's how we deal with it over time. You know, the French and the Brits were very unhappy with us after the 1956 Suez incident because we did not support them. These kind of things are to some extent, are the nature of coalitions. I think the U.S. just has to work very hard with our allies and continue to hold them to account. But the cohesion of the alliance, ultimately, that is the best way to make sure that the alliance never is involved in a war.
So, General, final question. What is your opinion? Do you think now it's been 18 months of war, will Ukraine persevere? Will Ukraine win?
Yeah, of course, Ukraine is going to win. And keep in mind that, as you know, better than most, the war started in 2014. And after 9 years of war, Russia still only occupies less than a fifth of Ukraine. They're losing ground. They have not been able to destroy a single train or convoy bringing ammunition or equipment from Poland into Ukraine. The Black Sea Fleet is retreating, and Ukraine doesn't even have a navy. So I remain optimistic. Of course, if we, the West, would commit to Ukraine winning and deliver those things necessary to help them win versus delivering what's necessary to help them survive, this would end much sooner. But I think we know from history that war is a test of logistics and it's a test of will. Clearly, the Ukrainians, people and soldiers, have superior will. They need us to provide those things necessary for them to actually win.
Excellent. General, we greatly appreciate your time.
Thanks for the privilege.